So that was Corneliu Porumboiu's film Police Adjective. I'm Matthew Tank's managing editor, and I'm joined by Paula Erizanu, journalist and writer. So Paula, welcome. As we can
Thank
see,
you.
the film is looping in the background. Um, Tell me, what were your kind of general impressions of the film?
So the film was shot in 2009, and that's a very special year for me because in April 2009 we had mass protests in Moldova, my native country, and we were confronted with like a wave of unprecedented police brutality, much like what is happening in Belarus at the moment, but to a smaller scale. So I was really, so to me, the kind of police adjective, is a story not so much about language as I think lots of film critics see it, but it's more to do with like a film about a political system that we've inherited from the communist regimes, and it's to do with like the fight, the struggle between the individual and the system. Yeah, and I guess what was surprising for me in watching this film was that all of this violence that I associate our police system with was actually, no, muted. It's like it's underlying, but you never quite see it. So we never quite see, how the kind of the end goal, the mission takes place, how these guys get arrested. We don't see whether that's a kind of calm endeavor or whether that's violent. And yeah, and I guess it like the film was quite surprising for me in the way it looks at the underlying kind of violence and totalitarianism of the system rather than at its more kind of obvious faces.
Mm. Yeah, I think
What
that's
did you think?
Well, no, I think just to build off that is a great introduction. I think to the what the film's getting at, and I think that I think you can't talk about the film without really dwelling on that sort of the final scene. The very kind of slow moving, long scene between the three men in the captain's office, because as you touched upon, the film is a lot more about violence than language, perhaps. And I think in that scene, what the captain's clearly trying to do is to make his point through some kind of performative argument or debate, using the dictionary in that kind of very patronizing way, getting him to read out these definitions as if there's some kind of logic behind it. Whereas I think in the very very final scene where we see that the main character has sort of submitted, you get the sense that was much more out of a kind of implicit violence, a kind of an aggression, a feeling of being coerced into something that actually was really nothing to do with the language games that the captain was kind of involving himself in. But it's such a gripping sequence that I think when we see these three men very much in their own realities, neither of them quite sort of talking the same language, looking past each other. And it's almost actually quite a painterly scene because you have this fake fruit bowl in the middle. And almost as if there's a kind of, playful nod to the kind of, the fiction of the film or creation this is a film that invites so many interpretations because of the fact that it does focus on language and the plasticity of language and how one law for someone can mean something very different for someone else. And so I just thought it was a really remarkable exploration of that. But absolutely, I think that even though there is a lot about language, I think that the violence is perhaps muted, but definitely there. I think you can kind of feel it in these silences, in the pauses, in what we don't see on the camera.
Yeah, I was thinking that actually for English speakers, the kind of top-down hierarchy of the academy doesn't really exist. So I feel like English is a lot more democratic as a language, whereas Romanian, like French, has an academy that tells people what is the right way to use words and which words are actually words. So yeah, I guess that's one kind of um, system difference, and with different repercussions. Because I guess you can't really make this kind of film in the UK because the kind of whole metaphor that on which the film centers doesn't apply to the English language in the same way.
Mm. And actually, I was quite intrigued, and maybe this is my naivety, but I mean, listening to the language, it seems like there's so many, particularly in the greetings, borrowed words from French and Italian and and Spanish. They say like thank you is merci, right? Often, and I don't know. I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit and um, talk a little about the language that's actually used in the film.
Yeah, so Romanian is a Romance language,
Mm.
and it's very close to Italian. That's probably the closest language. There's the stats that I think like between 60 and 80% of Romanian words have Latin roots.
Right.
But I think that might have also been a kind of ideological kind of transformation at some point historically. But yeah, the language that's used in the film is just kind of everyday Romanian language. Although, yeah, I was just thinking about that song that I can't remember the character's name, the wife of the policeman who's a teacher that
Yeah.
she was listening to on repeat. That's I guess that's a famous song from the communist era from like the 80s or something, and that's where the language gets like really metaphorical and jolly, and it's in a totally different register to the rest of the film. And I feel like that's also an artistic statement for Porumboiu, because he, you know, he champions realism, and he's kind of going against this romanticization of film and art, and yeah, I guess that kind of comes across even to an international audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, and after that, I mean, it's quite a comical scene because obviously she plays this song on repeat, and it's almost. I mean, the film has so many of these moments where things are repeated ad nauseum, in a kind of maddening sense. Whether it's the very very slow moving reading out of the reports, or simply just watching the policeman move around. I mean, it's almost like an anti-drama in that sense, that it's set up to be this kind of police procedural, and we have this idea of the sting operation lurking, and that's actually not what the drama is at all. It's it's everything else. But just back to the song, obviously after it's finished, he says, why can't people just speak literally? I think. And so I wonder, I guess there feels like there is a kind of, he is a sort of mouthpiece for Porumboiu, maybe. I'm not, not to speak for him, but there is, I suppose, a sense with his films that there's a attempt to, show things how they really are, particularly away from an era that came before that was so invested in in symbolism and yeah, spreading ideas through metaphor. So perhaps he is Porumboiu's kind of mouthpiece in that sense.
Yeah, I think also what makes the scene funny is that it's about a love song that's so romantic and kind of seems to represent a dream for her, which is in deep contrast with the kind of mundane reality of their marriage, where like she's cooked soup for her husband and he eats it over like 1 minute and a half, and we see every sip that he takes. And, yeah, and that has a kind of tragic comical effect. Although I wouldn't say tragic, but more like both dramatic and comical effect.
Mm. And actually, I saw a few similarities with another film. It's actually a documentary by Porumboiu called Infinite Football. And I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's basically he finds this guy in Romania that wants to change the rules of football, which I think for speaking now, for a lot of people that would just like a kind of blasphemous thing to do. It's the rules seem so kind of set, but this man thinks like the ball needs to be liberated, and actually like it's all spatially wrong, and there are ways that it could be a lot freer. But I just noticed throughout the film there are so many moments of maybe kind of confusion about laws and whether something is a law or isn't a law. I'm thinking about the man that wants to play tennis football with the policeman, and of course, like leading up to the kind of definitions, there's a lot of confusion, I think, between whether something is open to discussion or whether like something isn't. And I think the way the film closes, there's a kind of bit of a brutal reminder that perhaps which comes from what you're talking about, this kind of hangover of totalitarianism, that we aren't free to make these decisions actually, and there is a kind of state that is still oppressing the individual, and I think the film takes you through a kind of journey where you feel there are moments where something will open up and then it's kind of closed down right at the end, in quite a brutal way.
Is Infinite Football the football game from the 80s where like he talks to his dad, who is an international referee, about the game? Or is that a different one?
I think it's very much
A
someone who wants to
different one.
change the rules. He really
Okay.
isn't happy with football, and he wants to change the
Yeah,
rules.
no, I haven't seen that one then. But yeah, it directly seems to connect with that opening
Mm.
scene about the tennis rules.
And I think that there's so many there's not lots of moments, I think, of sort of quiet absurdity, that I would link to other directors that are actually also in our season on Tank TV, by like Zvyagintsev, for example. In his film Leviathan, there's that very famous court scene where the woman is sort of reading out these statutes or regulations. I can't quite remember, but it really I was reminded of that scene when they're waiting to go in to see the captain, and the secretary is typing, and all you hear is this tapping, and it's just, I think there's just something so it really comes from, I think, that tradition of like absurdism, sort of shining a light on the absurdity of the everyday to the point of kind of meaninglessness. And I thought there's a really, really kind of comical moment in that scene as well, where the policeman's saying to her, "It seems like you do more work than we do," and they mean it as a kind of ironic comment. And from the film, actually, that's actually quite true. Like, in terms of what actually gets done, the policemen seem to be kind of aimlessly wandering quite a lot of the time, not seemingly catching the guys that need to be caught, and spending their time on sort of more trivial matters, bowing down to their bureaucracy. But sorry, I'm
Yeah,
rambling
but
there.
so sorry.
Don't worry, no. I said do interrupt me because I'm just rambling. So
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that I was listening to this interview with Porumboiu, and he was saying that in order to make this film, he spent some time at a police station in Vaslui, in his native town, in eastern Romania, in Moldova. And yeah, and this is what he discovered, that initially he wanted to make the film to be a lot more kind of fast moving, fast pacing. But once he did his research, he realized that action actually happens quite rarely, and most of a policeman's everyday reality is yeah, to do with like bureaucracy and research and so on. Well, yeah, I was going to say something else, but I kind of forgot.
I
So
don't
yeah,
want
interrupt me.
what you're saying as well. It reminds me of there's a great um, quote by a critic who writes about Nausgaard's writing that you could probably link to this, where he autopsies the minutiae of the everyday, and I think there's definitely a kind of autopsying going on, and I think it's a good word because there is something quite deadening about the effect. It is quite excruciating, but it's also incredibly compelling at the same time. It kind of manages to, I think, to find that balance really, really well. And yeah, I
Yeah,
think,
so go on.
no, go ahead.
One other thing that kind of makes the filming be feel very slow as well is that and feel like something that makes the film feel like a time capsule as well is the fact that this kind of provincial police station seems to have been stuck in the kind of communist past. I'm thinking about, or I mean, or at least like a few decades, before 2009. I was thinking about like the computers they have, the furniture they have, and in the offices, the phones. They have it's not the latest kind of modern technology, and I think that speaks about both the spirit that's been inherited from the communist era, but also about the kind of present state of Romania, which is and like its post-communist reality, which basically means a kind of dwindling state and a weaker state and austerity measure, economic crisis, and yeah, and so on. I'm not sure whether that's clear to an international audience, because you might just think that this is, all of Romania at that point in 2009.
Yeah, well, no, but I think it gives you clues as well because they talk about Bucharest and then being, the Paris of the East. So I think there are kind of clues that we are in a very provincial setting, and actually that conversation between the policeman um, and I think it's the prosecutor there, that sort of I think builds from a kind of a trope. I mean, that at least I've read in things like Russian literature and things of wanting to get to these big cities, to Prague, to Paris, to somewhere else. So I think that is kind of stated early on. I think, and as you say, I think the setting really contributes to that. And actually, we're always very. You don't really see a lot of the town itself. I mean, we're either kind of very, very close up following the policeman through the streets or in his locker or in his home. It's quite a kind of claustrophobic depiction of him. Where just as much as he is stalking these teenagers smoking hash, we're stalking him, and so I think that double irony is always there as well, which is yeah, like I think a nice kind of layer.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that. I think also something that has been quite key with the Romanian new wave, is that for the first time in a long time, or maybe ever, we felt represented in cinema on our own terms, because like before 1989, Romanian cinema was mostly propagandistic, and then you get like the kind of Western gaze on Romania and Eastern Europe more generally, and and so when you're talking about us stalking the policeman who's stalking these kids, I guess for a Romanian, this is also a mirror. It's like we're also looking at ourselves. We're seeing our interiors, for the first time. I don't mean the souls. I mean the homes.
Actual interiors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, the food we make. We're hearing the way we speak, and I think that has been very powerful in terms of like creating an identity and maybe moving away a bit from our obsession, kind of inferiority complex with Paris or Prague or the West.
Well, Paula, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much. Those were, some brilliant insights, and great to get your your take on the film. So thanks so much for talking to me.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, we'll speak to you later.